genetic component is truly something. If you look at something like basketball in the NBA, well, there's a genetic component with that. But with bodybuilding, I feel like there's less in your control to some degree as far as where your muscles attach. Again, structure to your frame, like you can't change any of that. But then again, in basketball, same thing. You're either tall or you're not, and that's going to affect your game, right?
Yeah, the stats on if a random person is an NBA player get hilarious once you talk about someone who's over 7 foot. I'm going to actually look it up real quick. There's some stats on this that kind of give people an understanding of the likelihood of someone being an NBA player if they're over 7 feet tall. And it's something like 1 out of 10 or something like that. Yeah, I got it right here. If you happen to be over 7 feet tall, your chances of being an NBA are 1 in 6.
Oh, wow.
So anyone you meet in the world who's 7 foot or taller, there's like a 15% chance that they are an NBA player. And obviously, like if you were to look at that in a different way and be like, all right, every NCAA Division I basketball player, less than 1% of them become basketball players. That's saying like we're taking people who are the best amateur basketball players in the US and less than 1 in 100 are going to be in that, NBA caliber. But if you just take someone you have no idea about their basketball skills and they're 7 feet tall, 15%.
Elaborate on that to a degree, because people might miss that. Like they think, okay, basketball height, bodybuilding structure, and even for the longest time they were not dismissing it, but it was kind of getting overlooked until more and more people started talking about it. But like if you look ice hockey, golf, where would you say is that genetic component involved in some of these sports where you can't?
Oh man. So golf, ice hockey, any targeting sport, baseball, especially hitting, you have to have a certain level of visual acuity and reaction times, which are incredibly rare. The ability to hit a baseball when it's being thrown at you at 90 miles per hour plus, you take somebody and you have a little bit of eye degradation. Nope, you're not a hitter. You're done. You're just not there. And there are position and sport specific genetic determinants that select for a certain type of person at a high level. When you look at sports, when you watch the Olympics or you watch professional sports, you will see certain body types that are associated with certain sports. And you can train for it to a degree, but you are basically gate kept to a certain level based upon your structure. And if we apply that to bodybuilding, well, you can apply it to a lot of sports, like marathon and like endurance sports are really obvious as well. Like there's a strong component of VO2 max.
Gymnastics, like the girls.
100% gymnastics.
That one's a big one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because you can see it, right? Like what you mentioned about that, the visual and the coordination, those are sometimes things that, you can see it displayed in skill. If you don't have that understanding like you do, you're like, no, that's all skill, that's all talent. But there's the genetic component there that it's not as easy to see like you do with height or structure, right?
Bodybuilding is an absolute dog and pony show. And I think a lot of people who are maybe not involved in the competitive side of it, they look at it as height and weight and FFMI and body fat percentage, but those things don't really clearly express where you can take the sport competitively. Like I had a very good initial response to bodybuilding. I put on probably a legitimate 25 pounds of muscle in my first year of training. That's pretty good. And then since then I've put on another 10, or something like that. Like if you just look at where did I start and where did I go, but relative to where I started and then the type of frame that I have, I'm not going to sit here and say I don't have good genetics for bodybuilding because that's a relative statement. And I think it'd be very dismissive and unfair to people who have a really poor genetic hand for bodybuilding, who maybe would have put on 5 pounds and have a very high body fat settling point and, have wide hips and narrow shoulders, even compared to me, and then odd limb lengths, for example, or someone extremely lanky, like a basketball player,
right?
Like, hey man, you're 7 foot, you're probably not going to be a good bodybuilder, right? Even though you're potentially an elite athlete. So I have probably good genetics compared to the average person. Compared to pro bodybuilders, WNBF or IFBB, whatever, my genetics are probably bottom tier. Like I have some things that I've come to see, they look better than I thought in terms of just the flow and my symmetry. I'm 6 foot. I was the tallest middleweight in that class. If you watched, Benjamin Schuster was nearly my height and Frederick was nearly my height. And those are 1 and 2. So it's not like it's insurmountable to be tall as a middleweight, but I don't have heavyweight bone structure. I have heavyweight height, but middleweight bone structure or lightweight bone structure on middleweight frame. Just from the perspective of how big am I? I'm, about 10 pounds lighter than would be ideal. And then from the way my physique sits and settles, I do have some good aesthetics and I do have some good symmetry, but there are certain things that hold me back. Like people will always praise my side shots. And that's because from the front, you can see I'm a little narrower and my bones aren't that big. My rib cage is relatively small. I have a narrow shoulder girdle compared to other bodybuilders. I don't have a narrow shoulder girdle. Like when I sit in the aisle seat on a plane, I'm constantly getting bumped by people compared to just anybody. Yeah, maybe I have broadish shoulders, but compared to bodybuilders, I don't.
Right.
So it's the kind of thing where pros at a certain level, if they're good, if I was just to show a picture of my physique in shape or reasonably in shape by myself, you're like, oh shit, like that's good. But once you start putting me next to other people, it shakes out differently. So for me, I'm not someone who can ever come into a show and not be shredded and be at the same level. I have to be in really, really good shape for my structure and what I have. But I've also come to accept that maybe I was being a little too harsh and critical of my structure because I've done better than I expected. And I've seen myself now and I'm like, oh, wow. Like I've got some pictures of me next to Malcolm Cooper, which I think is hilarious because he's like perfectly built as a bodybuilder, and it does kind of look like you just took me and like just squished me down to being like 3 inches shorter and then just like, expanded. Like he's the fun mirror version of me, which is kind of the point. Like it's like you're taking muscle and cramming it into a smaller frame and it makes the waist look smaller because the shoulders get broader. So I have a small waist, but it is all just relative to how wide are your shoulders, how far do your quad sweeps come out, and how wide are your lats. And then when you turn from the side, same thing. Can you recreate that small waist, broad shoulder look? There's only so much you can do with masking that with posing. There's only so much you can do with how much muscle can you put on. So that's another genetic component. It's like, what does your skeleton look like? Mm-hmm. And then how much muscle can you put on that skeleton? Because if you have just freaky muscle building potential, but you don't have a great skeletal structure, you can do a lot of damage. You can think of a lot of bodybuilders who are a little blocky, but they are just peeled and huge and it didn't matter. And they can do some pretty impressive things. I think Kurt Widener is the first example that comes to my mind. In 2009, he beat Sean Clarita at the US Cup in the overall. He won the heavies and Sean won the lights, and Kurt took him out because Kurt was shredded, peaked, and huge. And that's winning a pro show against a lightweight world champion. So like you got to give him his due props, but no one would look at Kurt's structure and his muscle attachments and say like, oh, he's God's gift to bodybuilding. But it just shows you how far you can take extreme conditioning, a good peak, and a lot of muscularity. In some other ways, you could have the opposite too. You could have a really, really pleasing structure and a nice flow to your physique, classic lines. You can pose well, and you could be a little bit under muscled and also be really freaky shredded, and you can edge out some of the bigger physiques. A great example was the overall at the Muscle Mayhem in 2019 in the amateurs, where Brian DaCosta did his first show as a bodybuilder, won the heavies, and he lost to Marvin from Hong Kong, who has a really tiny waist and just absolutely peeled. But every single muscle group of Marvin's was smaller than Brian's. Now, Brian wasn't out of shape, but he wasn't in the kind of shape where he looked as hard. And he also was I think his first bodybuilding show. His posing wasn't quite as good as it is now. And he looked blocky, which he's gotten much better at posing. And they just couldn't give it to him, even though, just 4 years later, he became the pro world champion. So I think there's a lot to be said for the different components of it and what you maximize. But you have a fair amount of agency, but to some degree you are kind of like I'm not going to say I'm going to sit here and say I'm capped, but I have to make very, very specific improvements, like focusing on making myself look wider in front shots, bringing up my back in certain ways in certain areas, to kind of hang with the pros. And it's good because it gives me a clear thing to focus on. And I think some people can get too caught up in their genetics, but you can't change it. So you focus on what you can.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great way to end that off, because I knew you were going to circle back around to that point, because that's important. People do get really fixated on that, discouraged, right? So, but no, I'm glad you brought that up. Really awesome insights. You obviously won your pro card. I think that was after we spoke, which again, congratulations on that. And then you flew to Seattle, competed at Worlds. Talk to us. How was that? What was the placing specifically? Just the whole thing.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, so we spoke before I had competed in Australia. That went fantastically well. So I had 3 shows in a row